They mocked it. They called it a tin can, a Tommy cooker, a joke on tracks. To the German tank crews, the American Sherman was nothing more than target practice, cheap, flimsy, mass-produced junk. But that laughter didn't last long, because in 1944, something new rolled onto the battlefield, a machine built in desperation, refined by genius, and feared by every panzer it faced. They thought they knew the Sherman. They had no idea what was coming. The mockery begins. In the early years of World War II, German tank crews had every reason to laugh. Their panzers, especially the fearsome Tiger and Panther, were symbols of mechanical perfection. Thick armor, high-velocity guns, and advanced optics made them kings of the battlefield. When they first encountered American Shermans, their laughter echoed across the front lines. The Sherman, they joked, was a rolling coffin. Its armor was thin, its gun weak, and its silhouette tall enough to be spotted miles away. German soldiers called it the Tommy cooker because when it was hit, the ammunition inside often ignited, turning the tank into a flaming death trap. The Nazis mocked it as a sign of American industrial incompetence, mass-produced junk compared to their precision-engineered machines. But that mockery missed something deeper. The Sherman wasn't designed for duels, it was built for strategy. The Americans wanted mobility, reliability, and overwhelming numbers, a tank that could be built fast, repaired easily, and shipped across oceans. While the Germans obsessed over perfection, the Allies focused on practicality. Still, to the men facing the Tiger's 88mm gun, those explanations didn't matter. In places like Normandy and Italy, Sherman crews felt the imbalance firsthand. They saw their shells bounce off Panther armor. They watched their friends' tanks burst into flames. It wasn't a fair fight, and both sides knew it. Yet even as German commanders mocked the cheap American steel, a quiet revolution was already underway in Allied workshops. Engineers on both sides of the Atlantic had grown tired of hearing that the Sherman couldn't win a duel. They wanted to build something that would wipe the smirk off every panzer commander's face, and soon they would. The battlefield imbalance. By 1943, the contrast between German and Allied armor was impossible to ignore. The Tiger I, with its impenetrable front plate and monstrous 88mm cannon, could destroy a Sherman before the American crew even saw it. The Panther, sleek and fast, carried the same deadly firepower with even better maneuverability. Allied crews learned to fight differently, not by charging, but by flanking. They had to use numbers and cunning to survive. One Sherman couldn't take down a Tiger, but 5 might if they could circle around and attack from the sides. It was brutal, dangerous, and often suicidal. Reports from the front painted a grim picture. Commanders described tank duels where dozens of Shermans were lost for every Panther destroyed. Some American soldiers began to resent their own machines, calling them Ronsons, after the lighter brand known for its slogan, "Lights every time." But the truth was more complicated. The Sherman's engine rarely failed. It could cross bridges that German tanks crushed under their own weight. It could be repaired in hours, not days. The problem wasn't the tank, it was the gun. The 75mm cannon simply couldn't penetrate German armor from a distance. The Allies needed a miracle, something powerful enough to punch through a Tiger's front, but small enough to fit inside a Sherman's turret. British engineers took the challenge personally. They had already developed one of the deadliest anti-tank guns of the war, the 17-pounder. If they could somehow mount it on the Sherman, the balance of power might shift overnight. The Germans didn't believe it could happen. They were about to find out how wrong they were. Desperation for firepower. By 1944, the imbalance on the battlefield had turned desperate. Allied tank crews were brave. But bravery alone couldn't pierce German armor. Reports kept flooding in. Shermans destroyed at long range, entire platoons wiped out by a single Tiger hidden behind a hedgerow. Every battle felt like a gamble with death. The Allies needed a tank killer, and fast. But designing an entirely new machine would take years they didn't have. The only solution was to turn the Sherman into something deadlier. In Britain, a small group of engineers from the Royal Armoured Corps began experimenting with the powerful 17-pounder anti-tank gun. It was one of the few weapons capable of penetrating a Tiger's thick front armor, but it was massive, far too large for the Sherman's turret. Most believed the idea was impossible. Not everyone agreed. A stubborn British officer named Lieutenant Colonel George Witheridge had seen too many men die inside burning tanks. He refused to accept that the Sherman couldn't evolve. Working with engineer W.G.K. Kilbourne at the Vickers factory, they began cutting, welding, and re-engineering the turret by hand. The recoil system was shortened, ammunition repositioned, and the radio moved into a rear box on the tank's hull. It was crude, but it worked. After weeks of improvisation, a test model was rolled out onto a British proving ground. The 17-pounder roared. Its shell tore through the steel target like paper. The observers stood in stunned silence. The impossible had just become real. They had created something no one expected from the Allies, a tank that could kill a tiger. They called it the Sherman Firefly. It wasn't perfect. The recoil nearly smashed the gunner every time he fired, and the massive barrel made it an obvious target. But for the first time, the Allied crews had something powerful enough to fight back, something that could finally make the Germans afraid. Birth of the Firefly. When the first Sherman Fireflies rolled out in early 1944, few realized just how much they would change the war. They looked similar to regular Shermans, same chassis, same hull, but the long, deadly 17-pounder barrel gave them a predatory look. The Germans noticed it too. Crews immediately began to develop tactics around their new weapon. Because the Firefly's gun was so distinctive, it was often hidden among regular Shermans until the moment of battle. The goal was deception, to make the enemy underestimate them until it was too late. During training, British gunners quickly learned what their new weapon could do. The 17-pounder shell could slice through even the thickest German armor at over 1,000 meters. Tiger and Panther tanks that once felt invincible suddenly became vulnerable. For the first time, Allied crews could engage head-on and win. Still, the Firefly was rare. Only about 1 in 4 Shermans in a unit carried the upgraded gun. That made it both precious and hunted. German commanders began issuing new orders. Destroy the long-barreled Shermans first. The Firefly had earned its reputation within weeks of entering combat. Then came Normandy. As Allied troops pushed inland after D-Day, Fireflies began to see their first real action. Their long barrels flashed across hedgerows and villages, knocking out German tanks that had once dominated the battlefield. Stories spread fast, of Firefly crews taking out tigers from distances the Germans thought impossible. The laughter that once filled German radio chatter went quiet. The tank they had mocked was now the one they feared. First blood in Normandy. When the Allies stormed the beaches of Normandy in June 1944, the Sherman Firefly was already waiting offshore, loaded on landing craft and ready for its baptism by fire. The men inside those tanks had no idea their invention would soon change how the Germans fought. As Allied forces pushed through the dense hedgerows of the French countryside, German armor lay in ambush. Panthers, tigers, and self-propelled guns hidden in fields and villages. The first encounters were brutal. Ordinary Shermans continued to suffer under the crushing power of German guns, but then the Fireflies began to speak. On June 8, near Villers-Bocage, a British Firefly spotted a tiger crossing an open field at over 1,000 yards. The gunner, calm under pressure, fired a single round. The shell punched through the tiger's frontal armor and exploded inside. The German tank erupted in flames before it could even return fire. Word spread quickly. The Allies finally had a tiger killer. Soon every German crew knew to fear that long, slender barrel. Entire formations changed tactics, hiding behind terrain or retreating when Fireflies were reported nearby. For years, the Allies had fought against overwhelming odds. Now they could finally strike back with equal force. In the following weeks, Fireflies became a nightmare for the German armored divisions. From the bocage of Normandy to the ruins of Caen, their 17-pounder guns destroyed dozens of tigers and panthers. Allied soldiers began to call them the big gun, a weapon that could turn a hopeless fight into victory in seconds. What began as desperation had become domination. For the first time since 1940, the laughter had stopped. The tables turned. By late summer 1944, the German panzer crews had developed a new instinct: fear. Whenever they spotted the long barrel of a Firefly among the Shermans, they opened fire immediately. Not because it was easy prey, but because it was the deadliest thing on the field. Intelligence reports even confirmed new standing orders: destroy the Firefly first. Its presence alone could shift the balance of a battle. German tank commanders, once proud and overconfident, began to hesitate before advancing. The machine they mocked had forced them onto the defensive. In battles across France, Belgium, and Holland, the Firefly proved its worth. At ranges where the Tiger once ruled supreme, British and Canadian crews now fired first and finished the fight with a single shot. A Firefly could penetrate a Panther's armor at over 1,500 meters, something no other Allied tank could dream of doing. But behind the victories were men who had seen too much. Many Firefly crews knew they were prime targets. Their tanks were marked for death before any others. To survive, they painted the barrels to disguise their length, hid in shadows, and used the element of surprise. And yet, despite the danger, morale soared. For the first time, Allied tankers felt equal to the enemy. They had proven that ingenuity and courage could match even the most advanced war machine Germany could build. The Firefly didn't just change the battlefield, it changed the psychology of the war. The Germans had lost their aura of invincibility, and the Allies had gained something priceless: belief. Legacy of the Firefly. By the end of World War II, the Sherman Firefly had earned a reputation far beyond what anyone expected from a converted tank. It wasn't the fastest, nor the most comfortable, and its armor was still thin compared to German beasts. But none of that mattered anymore. The Firefly had done what no one believed possible. It had made the once invincible Tiger afraid. Across Europe, stories circulated among Allied troops of Fireflies knocking out enemy tanks from impossible distances, of single gunners saving entire infantry columns, of underdogs turning the tide through sheer ingenuity. For many tank crews, the Firefly became more than a machine. It was a symbol of survival, proof that courage and creativity could overcome perfection and pride. German officers, too, took notice. Many captured reports spoke with reluctant respect about the Firefly's power. Some even admitted that it forced them to change tactics completely, to move at night, to fight from cover, to fear what once seemed laughable. The tank that had been mocked as a tin can was now being studied for its effectiveness. When peace finally came, the Sherman Firefly faded quietly into museums and scrapyards, but its legacy endured. It showed the world that technology alone doesn't win wars, people do. The engineers who refused to give up, the crews who faced death inside those steel coffins, and the nations that learned to adapt rather than despair, they were the real weapons of victory. The Nazis had mocked the American tanks, but in the end, those rolling coffins rolled all the way to Berlin,